Your soulmate just discovered that one of the darkest things they believed about you may have been a complete lie. One explosive confession shattered a story they had trusted for far too long. The person speaking knew exactly what had happened, and knew exactly who had been blamed. But the most disturbing part was not the confession itself, it was the reason the truth had been hidden from your soulmate until now. And once your name was mentioned, everything they thought they understood about losing you suddenly began to collapse. Listen carefully. Because this confession did not come from a stranger trying to create drama. It came from someone who had been close enough to watch the entire situation unfold from the beginning. Someone who knew what your soulmate had been told about you, knew how those words had changed their behavior toward you, and knew that every time your soulmate tried to question the story, another explanation was placed in front of them. For a long time, your soulmate believed they were protecting themselves by staying distant. They believed there had been something you had done, something you had said, or some decision you had secretly made that proved they could no longer trust what existed between you. They may have acted cold. They may have disappeared when you expected them to fight. They may even have allowed other people to believe that walking away from you had been their own choice. But underneath all of that distance was a story they had accepted as truth, and tonight, somebody finally admitted that story had been manipulated. It happened during a conversation that was never supposed to become emotional. Your soulmate was not demanding answers. They were not trying to reopen the past. In fact, they had spent so much time convincing themselves that what happened between you was finished that they had learned how to speak about it without showing everything they still felt. But then one person in the room said something that did not match what your soulmate had been told. It was a small detail at first. A date that was wrong. A message that supposedly came from you but suddenly had no clear source. A conversation your soulmate had been told happened privately, even though this person claimed they had actually been present. Your soulmate immediately noticed the contradiction. They looked directly at the person and asked a simple question, then why was I told something completely different? That question changed the entire atmosphere. The person who had carried this truth for so long suddenly became uncomfortable. Their eyes dropped. Their voice changed. And instead of giving your soulmate another excuse, they finally said the words nobody expected, because what you were told about them was never the whole truth. Your soulmate froze. Not because they instantly understood everything, but because somewhere deep inside, they had always felt that certain pieces never fit. They had tried to silence that feeling. They had told themselves they were being emotional, that perhaps love was making them question reality, that maybe moving forward required accepting things they would never completely understand. But now another person was confirming exactly what their instincts had whispered for months. Don't skip. Because what came next was not simply an apology. It was a confession about how your name had been used to influence one of the biggest emotional decisions your soulmate ever made. The person admitted that there had been pressure behind the scenes. They admitted that certain conversations had been repeated to your soulmate differently from how they actually happened. Your words had been shortened, twisted, and placed into situations where they sounded colder than you intended. Your silence during one painful moment had been described as rejection, even though nobody had told your soulmate what you were dealing with at that time. A decision you made because you were trying to protect your dignity had been presented as proof that you no longer cared. And the worst part was that the people around your soulmate had repeated these interpretations so many times that eventually your soulmate stopped questioning them. Imagine what happened inside them as they heard this. They suddenly remembered every moment when they had wanted to contact you but stopped themselves. Every night when they opened an old message and wondered whether they had misunderstood you. Every time somebody told them, "Forget it." They already made their choice. Every time your soulmate tried to defend you and was made to feel foolish for still believing there could have been another explanation. They had carried resentment toward you, but underneath that resentment was grief. And now the confession was forcing them to face a possibility much harder than anger. What if they had spent all this time grieving a betrayal that never actually happened? Your soulmate asked who started the story. Nobody answered immediately. That silence told them almost as much as the confession. Their expression changed. This was no longer about an old misunderstanding. Now they wanted names. They wanted to know who had first taken your actions and turned them into something damaging. They wanted to know why people who claimed to care about them had allowed them to build an entire emotional future around information that was incomplete. The person confessing tried to say that everyone believed they were protecting your soulmate. But that explanation only made things worse. Your soulmate responded with something nobody in the room expected. Protecting me would have meant letting me hear the truth and decide for myself. And that was the moment the old story about you finally started falling apart. Your soulmate began remembering your character instead of the accusations. They remembered the way you had shown up when nobody was watching. They remembered conversations where your words had been completely different from the version later repeated to them. They remembered the patience you had shown even when you were hurt. Most of all, they remembered one specific moment when you had tried to explain yourself, and they had refused to listen because they believed they already knew the truth. That memory hit them harder than anything else. Because now they realized you may have been standing in front of them trying to tell the truth while they were listening to everyone except you. The confession continued. The person admitted that after you and your soulmate became distant, there had been opportunities to correct the misunderstanding. There had been moments when someone could have called your soulmate aside and said, "There is something you deserve to know." But nobody did. Pride became involved. Fear became involved. People were afraid that admitting the truth would expose their own role in what happened. So the lie survived because correcting it would have required several people to admit they had been wrong. Your soulmate stood up. Nobody knew whether they were angry, heartbroken, or about to leave. Then they asked one final question: did they ever try to reach me after all of this happened? The person confessing looked toward the floor again. Your soulmate immediately knew the answer was going to hurt. Because there was one last secret connected to you, something that had been kept from them completely. Something you apparently tried to do after the separation. Something your soulmate never received, never saw, and never knew existed. And when the person finally revealed exactly what you had sent, your soulmate's face completely changed. The person finally admitted that you had tried to send something after everything fell apart. Not once, but more than once. There had been a message meant specifically for your soulmate, a message that could have changed the way they understood the entire situation, but it never reached them. Someone had seen it first. Someone had decided that your soulmate was better off never knowing what you had said. And suddenly the room felt smaller, heavier, almost impossible to breathe in, because your soulmate was no longer dealing with a misunderstanding. They were dealing with the realization that information had been deliberately kept away from them. Your soulmate stared at the person who was confessing and asked, "What did the message say?" For several seconds, there was no answer. The person tried to explain that it had happened a long time ago, that emotions were high, that everyone believed they were doing what was best. But your soulmate was finished accepting explanations. They wanted your exact words. They wanted to know what you had tried to tell them while they were being convinced that you had simply walked away without caring. Finally, the truth came out. Your message had not been angry. It had not been cruel. You had not blamed your soulmate or demanded anything from them. Instead, you had explained that there were things happening behind the scenes that they did not know about. You had written that you never wanted them to believe your silence meant you stopped caring. You had admitted that you were hurt, confused, and unsure whom you could trust, but you had still left the door open for one honest conversation. You had even written something that made your soulmate lower their head the moment they heard it. "If you ever want the truth directly from me, I will tell you everything." Those words hit differently now. Because your soulmate realized they had spent so much time believing that you refused to explain yourself, when in reality you had tried to do exactly that. The confession became even more painful when the person admitted why your message was hidden. Someone close to your soulmate feared that if the two of you spoke directly, everything they had been saying would immediately begin to unravel. They had already convinced your soulmate that you were emotionally finished, that you had chosen another direction, that reaching out to you would only create more humiliation. If your soulmate had received your message, they might have asked questions. And questions were dangerous because the story people had created around you could not survive a direct conversation between the two people who actually lived it. Your soulmate became quiet. Not calm, quiet. There is a difference. This was the kind of silence that comes when someone is mentally replaying months of their life and seeing every moment through completely different eyes. They remembered the night they almost called you. They remembered typing your name into their phone and then deleting it because someone had told them you would laugh at their weakness. They remembered being told that you were already happy without them. They remembered pretending not to care when your name came up at family gatherings because admitting they still had questions made people around them uncomfortable. And now they understood why. Too many people had benefited from them never asking you directly. Don't skip. Because the person confessing then revealed something your soulmate had never even suspected. The hidden message was not the only thing that had been intercepted. There had also been a second attempt. Weeks later, you had asked someone whether your soulmate was doing okay. You had not asked for private details. You had not tried to interfere in their life. You had simply wanted to know whether they were all right. But that small question was never passed along. Instead, your soulmate was told the opposite, that you had never asked about them again. That was the moment your soulmate's composure started breaking. They whispered, "You told me they never even asked." The person confessing could barely respond. Your soulmate repeated it louder. "You looked me in the face and told me they never asked about me." Nobody defended the story anymore. Because there was nothing left to defend. Your soulmate walked toward the window, turned away from everyone, and stayed there for several moments. They were not only angry at the people who had misled them. They were angry at themselves. They were remembering how many times they had judged your silence without knowing that their own silence had been shaped by the same manipulation. Both of you had been waiting for proof that the other still cared, while other people were making sure neither side received it. Then your soulmate asked something unexpected. "Do they know what I was told?" The answer was no. That changed everything again. Because until that moment, your soulmate had been thinking mostly about what had been done to them. But suddenly they began thinking about what the situation must have looked like from your side. Perhaps you had watched them become distant and believed they chose that distance willingly. Perhaps you had tried to communicate and assumed they ignored you. Perhaps every unanswered attempt convinced you that your soulmate had already made their decision. And for the first time that night, your soulmate said something that revealed how deeply the confession had affected them. "They probably think I never cared." Nobody answered. Your soulmate looked back at the room and said, "They probably think I heard everything they tried to say and chose everyone else anyway." That possibility hurt more than the original lie. Because your soulmate could handle discovering that other people had manipulated the story. What they were struggling to handle was the idea that you may have spent all this time believing their rejection was intentional. The person who confessed tried to reassure them that perhaps too much time had passed and reopening everything would only create more pain. But your soulmate immediately rejected that idea. "No," they said. "Time doesn't turn a lie into the truth." Then they asked for everything. Every old message. Every conversation. Every detail that had been kept from them. They wanted dates. They wanted names. They wanted to know exactly when the first false story started and how many people had repeated it. The person confessing admitted that there had been one private meeting shortly before your soulmate made the decision to distance themselves from you. During that meeting, someone had presented what they claimed was proof that you had already moved on emotionally. Your soulmate remembered that meeting immediately. It had been the turning point. Before that night, they were still planning to speak with you. After that night, they stopped trying. Now they wanted to know what that so-called proof actually was. The person hesitated again. Then they admitted that the evidence had never been what your soulmate thought it was. A screenshot had been shown to them. But your soulmate had only seen part of it. One section had been cropped out. And the missing section completely changed the meaning of what you had said. Your soulmate's face went pale as they asked one question. Do you still have the original? This time, the person did not say no. They slowly reached for their phone. And when the full screenshot appeared on the screen, your soulmate finally saw the words that had been hidden from them all this time. But there was one name visible at the top of that message that nobody expected to see. A name connected directly to the person who had worked hardest to keep you apart. The name at the top of that message changed everything. Your soulmate had expected to see a stranger, an old friend, maybe someone who had misunderstood the situation from a distance. Instead, they saw the name of someone they had trusted completely. Someone who had repeatedly told them to stop asking questions about you. Someone who had insisted that reopening the past would only hurt them. And now the full screenshot showed that this same person had known the truth from the beginning. Your soulmate read the uncropped message again and again. The words they had once been shown as proof that you were finished with them now meant the exact opposite. You had been explaining that you were stepping back because you felt unwanted, not because you had stopped caring. You had written that if your soulmate ever came to you honestly, you would listen. But that final sentence had been removed before the screenshot was shown. Everything your soulmate had believed about you suddenly collapsed. They looked around the room and asked, "How many of you knew?" Nobody wanted to answer. That silence was enough. Your soulmate finally understood that the distance between you had never been created by one dramatic moment. It had been built slowly through missing messages, half-truths, private conversations, and repeated warnings designed to keep both of you from speaking directly. Then something unexpected happened. Your soulmate stopped shouting. The anger disappeared from their voice, and what replaced it was far more serious. They said, "I lost someone important because I trusted other people more than I trusted what I knew about them." No one in the room could argue with that. They picked up their phone and stared at your name for a long time. Their thumb hovered over the screen because contacting you now meant facing everything they had avoided. It meant admitting that they might have judged you unfairly. It meant accepting that you may not welcome them back. And most of all, it meant telling you a truth that should have been spoken long ago. But this time, nobody was going to make that decision for them. They walked out of the room carrying the full screenshot with them. Before leaving, they turned around and said, "Whatever happens next, I'm hearing it from them directly." That sentence ended the power everyone else had held over your story. Later that night, your soulmate opened the old conversations between you. They noticed things they had ignored before. The concern in your words. The unanswered questions. The moments where you seemed confused by their sudden distance. For the first time, they were reading your messages without someone else explaining what you supposedly meant. And the truth became painfully clear. You had not disappeared without caring. You had been hurt too. Your soulmate finally typed a message. They deleted it. Typed another. Deleted that one too. Because no ordinary apology felt big enough for what had happened, finally, they wrote something simple. "I just learned the truth about what happened between us. I know now that there were things you tried to tell me that I never received. I don't expect anything from you, but if you are willing, I want to hear the truth directly from you." Their finger remained over the send button. For several seconds, fear almost won again. Then they remembered how much damage had already been caused by silence. And they pressed send. Whatever happens after that message cannot erase the past. It cannot return the nights you both spent wondering why the other person stopped fighting. It cannot undo every painful decision made because of a false story. But one thing has changed forever. Your soulmate no longer believes the version of you they were given. They finally understand that the person they were told to forget may have been the one person who deserved to be heard from the beginning. And now that the confession has exposed everything, your soulmate is no longer asking everyone else what happened between you. They are finally ready to ask you.